Rain fell in thin, silvery needles upon the cobblestones, turning London's evening into a mirror of trembling light. Carriages rattled past with deliberate indifference, their wheels hissing through puddles as though the street itself were beneath notice. Gas lamps shuddered in the wind, gilding doorways and shadows alike, while whispers of laughter drifted from warm interiors where dignity was preserved by walls. At the edge of this glowing indifference stood a woman no one saw, her cloak darkened with rain, her spine straight from long practice in restraint, learned early, painfully, that invisibility could be both shield and sentence there. Her name was known only where labor was required, never where pleasure gathered. She belonged to others by necessity, a distant relation paid in lodging and obligation, trained to speak softly and accept correction as kindness. Beauty had brushed her lightly and passed on, leaving something subtler behind, an expression of watchful patience, eyes accustomed to measuring rooms for exits rather than admirers. Tonight, those eyes lifted toward a figure crumpled near the curb, a man whose fine coat drank rain while his breath faltered. Blood traced the stone, discreet yet alarming, ignored by passers-by intent on elsewhere tonight still. She hesitated, knowing hesitation was the language expected of her, then knelt regardless. His face was pale beneath aristocratic grooming, lashes clouded with rain, lips parted in an effort that failed him. He smelled of leather, wool, and something metallic that tightened her chest. Around them, footsteps slowed only to detour, skirts lifted, coats angled away. A gentleman should not be touched. A woman like her should know this. Still, she pressed her shawl to his wound and called for help. Her voice shook, yet carried, slicing the rain with quiet urgency born of resolve alone and unpraised, unnoticed, unseen. No one answered at first. Then a porter lingered, then a boy ran, and finally hands arrived that were careful and quick. The man was lifted, borne away toward warmth and linen, while she remained kneeling on the street, palms reddened, breath unsteady. A coin pressed into her fingers by a stranger felt heavier than insult. She refused it, closing his hand with a practiced bow that cost her more than it showed. When the carriage door shut, silence returned sharper. Her name was unasked, her courage filed away beneath inconvenience and damp skirts that evening, quietly, cruelly, completely erased. By morning, rumors had already learned to walk. In kitchens and antechambers, a story formed its own spine, bending facts toward suspicion. A woman found alone with a gentleman, a woman bold enough to touch what was not hers. Her employer's glance sharpened, neighbors paused conversations as she passed, and even kindness tasted conditional. She understood the pattern intimately. Virtue unobserved invited doubt, while mercy demanded proof. Yet within her chest lingered the memory of a breath returning under her hands, stubborn and real. She carried that truth like contraband, hidden carefully beneath plain fabric and silence alone, uncelebrated, enduring. He awoke hours later beneath a ceiling gilded with ancestral confidence, pain dulled by privilege and physicians. They spoke of chance, of timely intervention, of an unnamed woman whose presence blurred in memory like a dream interrupted. Gratitude stirred, then curiosity, then an unease he could not dismiss. Survival felt undeserved without acknowledgement. He insisted on hearing more, on tracing the moment backward, as though fate itself might be summoned and questioned. Outside, rain washed the city clean of evidence but not of consequence. Somewhere, a woman dried her shawl, unaware his life now leaned toward hers irrevocably, silently beginning. Their worlds remained misaligned, separated by corridors of power and habit, yet a thread had been drawn between them. For her, the days resumed their careful economy of obedience, though something within refused to settle back into smallness. For him, authority felt newly fragile, dependent upon a debt no ledger recorded. Each replayed the scene differently, she recalling the weight of a stranger's life, he sensing the absence of a face he could not picture. Both were unsettled for different reasons by the same mercy. It pressed against custom, rank, and fear, asking a price neither yet understood fully, entirely. In drawing rooms, his survival became a parlor triumph, a tale burnished for applause. No mention lingered of wet stone or a woman's bare hands. Meanwhile, she endured the quiet penalties reserved for those who disturb order without permission. Invitations evaporated, smiles thinned. She answered with composure learned through repetition, refusing to explain what explanation would cheapen. If kindness was to be her offense, she would not plead innocence. Still, at night, she wondered if the man lived and if living remembered. Memory, she knew, could be more selective than conscience when comfort was at stake for those safely sheltered. The city moved on, indifferent as ever, yet something subtle had shifted its balance. She walked with the knowledge of having mattered once, a dangerous awareness for someone of her station. He lay restless among silk sheets, troubled by gratitude unexpressed. Their stories, once parallel and unremarkable, had brushed, altering direction by degrees invisible to witnesses. Fate rarely announced itself with ceremony, it preferred the modest theater of streets and rain. What followed would not be kind, but it would be inevitable. Neither yet grasped how public cruelty sharpens when private debts threaten hierarchy and long-protected illusions of order. For now the night held its breath. She folded her cloak and prepared for another day of usefulness, unaware that her anonymity had already begun to erode. He turned his face toward the window, searching rain-dark glass for a figure without a name. In saving a stranger, she had trespassed upon a life fortified by power. In surviving, he had inherited a question no title could answer. Between them lay a choice approaching, silent and patient, waiting to demand everything. The world would soon insist upon obedience, and love would answer with ruin for them, together or forever apart, unnamed. He left his bed before dawn, defying physicians and protocol alike, drawn by a restlessness no draught could quiet. The house still slept, servants moving like shadows, while London exhaled damp breath through open streets. He rode without escort, coat plain, hat low, following a recollection shaped less by memory than by moral insistence. Gratitude, he discovered, was not passive, it demanded direction. The place came back to him in fragments, lamplight, rain, stone darkened by blood. He dismounted where the street bent toward commerce and waited, uncertain why waiting felt necessary at all. She arrived later, precisely when obligation required, carrying parcels that marked her usefulness to others. The morning light was merciless, revealing fatigue beneath her composure, but she walked with the same contained dignity that had knelt beside him days before. When she saw him, recognition flickered and vanished, schooled away by instinct. Gentlemen did not wait for women like her. He removed his hat regardless, the gesture awkward yet sincere, and spoke with restraint sharpened by purpose. He thanked her. He named survival as debt. He asked her name. The question startled her more than his presence ever could have. She answered quietly, expecting the sound to fall between them and be lost. Instead he repeated it as though testing its weight. Passers-by slowed. Curiosity pricked the air. He offered recompense, phrased as propriety, an envelope pressed into her hand with care. She refused without dramatics, returning it as one might return a borrowed book. Her refusal unsettled him. Gratitude had always moved downward. He had not prepared for resistance. He asked what she wanted instead, and the silence that followed was heavy with misunderstanding. She wanted nothing that could be taken back or spoken aloud. The exchange ended politely, too politely, and yet it traveled. By afternoon, the street knew more than either intended. A duke, saved by a woman of uncertain standing. A woman seen speaking with him again. Speculation bloomed, fertile and cruel. His family advised distance, gratitude already discharged through survival. Her employer warned discretion, eyes narrowing with concern that felt suspiciously like blame. That evening a parcel arrived at her door. Fine gloves, unworn, expensive. No note. The gift unsettled her more than money would have. Objects carried stories she could not control. She returned the gloves the next morning, leaving them with the porter and a message of thanks. The message was rewritten twice, each version too much or too little, until she chose plain words and plain ink. He received them with a tightening jaw and an unfamiliar warmth. Rejection, he realized, could be principled. It drew him closer. Days later, he encountered her again, this time under the indifferent gaze of chandeliers. A charity concert had admitted her as accompaniment, nothing more. He saw her standing alone, posture composed against the crowd's judgment, and crossed the room without calculation. They spoke of music, of weather, of inconsequence, yet the space between them vibrated with what could not be said. Eyes followed. Whispers gathered courage. Someone laughed too loudly. He offered her a seat nearer the stage, an act small enough to be defensible, bold enough to be noticed. She accepted after a breath's pause, aware that refusal would only sharpen attention. The music rose, but listening proved impossible. Each note felt like witness. When the evening ended, she left early, escorted by rumor, her name already fraying at its edges. The next morning brought consequence. Her position was questioned, her loyalty examined as though charity were theft. She listened, replied with restraint, and endured. Meanwhile, he faced his own admonitions, phrased as concern for legacy and alignment. Gratitude had been allowed, attachment was not. He listened, nodded, and left without promising anything. He sent a letter then, careful, respectful, asking permission to call. She stared at the paper until ink blurred. To accept was to invite speculation. To refuse was to erase herself again. She agreed, handwriting steady despite the risk. Their meeting was brief, circumscribed by walls and propriety. He spoke of obligation, of discomfort with silence. She spoke of limits, of the cost borne by those without insulation. When he reached for her hand, he stopped himself, knuckles whitening. The restraint mattered more than touch. They parted with words that lingered. Outside, the world waited, alert and hungry. That evening, invitations ceased arriving for her. The city had decided. Somewhere between gratitude and defiance, a line had been crossed. Neither yet knew who would be made to pay, but the price was already accruing, quietly, relentlessly, and soon demanded choice. Night gathered them into secrecy, a mercy the day would not grant. Rain whispered against the windows of the library where firelight trembled over spines of leather and gold, muting the city's judgment beyond thick walls. He had chosen the room deliberately, a place weighted with inheritance, where every book testified to lineage and order. She entered cautiously, cloak damp, gaze alert, carrying the knowledge that privacy itself was a borrowed luxury. When he closed the door, the sound landed between them with unmistakable finality, not confinement but intention, measured and irrevocable in its quiet. He did not approach at once. He spoke from distance, as though words required space to gather courage. He told her he had slept poorly since meeting her, that survival had unsettled him more than injury ever could. Gratitude, he admitted, had turned to something sharper, something that refused to be managed. She listened without interruption, hands folded, posture composed, yet the muscles of her jaw betrayed effort. She had been summoned often to hear explanations that changed nothing. This felt different, dangerous precisely because it acknowledged her as witness rather than convenience, a distinction that tightened her chest. She answered with restraint shaped by experience. She reminded him of the imbalance between them, of how attention fell heavier upon those without shelter. Every kindness he extended, she said, multiplied its cost upon her reputation. Her voice did not accuse, it catalogued. He absorbed each word with visible discomfort, as though confronting a wound he had helped reopen. The fire cracked softly, impatient. He asked then why she had saved him. The simplicity of the question startled them both, stripping circumstance bare of ornament or defense entirely. She searched for a response that would not cheapen the truth. At last she said she could not bear the thought of walking past. She had known too well what it meant to be unseen. The admission shifted something between them, subtle yet decisive. He moved closer, drawn by recognition rather than desire, eyes intent, unguarded. He told her no one had ever spoken to him so plainly without asking something in return. The observation carried awe and unease. In that moment, hierarchy flickered, briefly irrelevant, eclipsed by shared vulnerability and fragile respect. Silence followed, not empty but listening. Outside, rain steadied, a patient witness. He confessed then the conflict tightening around him. Counsel urging withdrawal, family invoking duty, a future mapped with ruthless efficiency. He spoke of expectations arranged long before his birth, alliances presented as inevitabilities. She understood constraint, though hers wore a different uniform. She said she did not wish to be the reason his world fractured. The thought of being another burden weighed heavier than scandal. Her dignity lay in refusal, a shield honed by years of careful subtraction and quiet endurance. He reached for her hand and stopped again, the hesitation deliberate. The restraint deepened the intimacy, acknowledging boundaries even as it strained against them. He said he did not know how to reconcile obligation with honesty, but he knew silence had already failed him. Her presence had become a question he could not dismiss. She withdrew a fraction, not from fear but from clarity. She told him affection did not absolve consequence, that affection without courage merely prolonged harm. The words were gentle, yet they struck with precision, demanding more than sentiment. For the first time he spoke her name not as gratitude but as claim, soft yet resolute. The sound altered the room, drawing an invisible line. She felt it keenly, the danger and the warmth entwined. She admitted she thought of him too, against her will, against sense. The confession cost her more than it cost him. She had survived by guarding her interior life fiercely. To expose it now felt like surrender. Yet withholding felt like erasure. The choice trembled between them, unsolved, pressing, alive with consequence and yearning alike. They spoke of nothing else then, circling the truth without exhausting it. When he offered protection, she declined, explaining she did not wish to be kept, only chosen. The distinction struck him deeply. Protection implied hierarchy, choice demanded equality. He promised nothing he could not yet deliver, which she recognized as honesty. When she prepared to leave, the library seemed to exhale, aware it would not easily contain what had passed within its walls. At the door, he told her he would not forget this night. She believed him, and that belief frightened her. After she left, he remained standing, the fire dwindling, the books watching. For the first time, his inheritance felt negotiable. Across the city, she walked beneath thinning rain, heart unsteady yet strangely lighter. She had spoken truth without apology and survived it. Yet survival no longer felt sufficient. Something had shifted, irreversible and exacting. The world beyond their shared confession waited with sharpened interest. In choosing to speak, they had summoned a reckoning. Soon, silence would no longer protect either of them, and choice would demand a price neither could avoid paying. The ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, lights scattering like trapped stars across polished floors, yet every glittering reflection failed to mask the weight pressing upon them. She entered in quiet dignity, her gown simple in color but exquisite in cut, walking as though every step claimed the space she had long been denied. Guests murmured at her presence, noting the audacity of proximity, the insinuation of grace that refused apology. He watched from across the room, seated where expectation demanded, eyes following her with attention that had once been reserved for decorum alone. The room held its breath, sensing the slow collision of propriety and defiance, a tension that could not remain unremarked. He rose at last, leaving the circle of observation, and crossed toward her with deliberate pace. The world seemed to constrict, narrowing to the space between them, the air charged with the electric hum of consequence. She met his gaze, steady, unflinching, aware that every glance would be judged. Yet there was no hesitation in her acknowledgement, no cowering before lineage or wealth. When he spoke, it was low and measured, carrying across the small distance as though to claim both the space and the moment. "I have come to speak of what cannot remain unspoken." She inclined her head, the faintest acknowledgement of consent, and the room exhaled collectively, unaware of the significance. The first words between them were careful, rehearsed for propriety, yet each carried weight beyond etiquette. He declared his gratitude, formal yet unmistakable, acknowledging that the life he had been granted belonged in part to her courage, and that gratitude alone would no longer suffice. Her lips parted in acknowledgement, the curve of a sigh rather than speech, and he leaned closer, offering the words that the room would not allow aloud, that he had chosen her, and that the choice would stand regardless of consequence. Whispers rippled around them, subtle but insistent. Those who had not seen guessed. Those who had recoiled. The challenge had been delivered not in aggression but in declaration, in the assertion that human bond outweighed social expectation. She responded with elegance, neither retreating nor capitulating, acknowledging the depth of sacrifice his words implied. "I cannot accept your protection as a gift," she said softly, "for it would be merely a tether. If you wish to bind yourself to me, let it be in recognition of choice, not pity." Her voice carried through the room, modest yet cutting, a reminder that dignity was not granted, it was exercised. He nodded, understanding fully the courage required to speak such truth before an assembly poised to judge. At that moment, intervention arrived as it always did in the form of expectation and obligation. Family members approached, faces tight with disapproval, whispering instructions, warnings, threats veiled in civility. He listened, eyes unwavering, hands relaxed but unyielding. Her presence no longer needed shielding, it demanded acknowledgement. She, in turn, bore the scrutiny with a composure that unsettled the assembly. She understood, as he did, that every gesture, every measured step, carried the weight of societal expectation, and yet here they stood, claiming space neither was permitted to occupy without consequence. He extended a hand, not a touch of ownership but an invitation, and she accepted with the slightest inclination of her wrist. Their movement together across the floor was understated, deliberate, each step an assertion against the invisible architecture of judgment. Conversations halted subtly as they passed, the ordinary hum of civility suspended by the defiance of their alliance. In choosing proximity, they had shifted the gravity of the room. The air thickened with potential scandal, yet beneath the weight, a strange exhilaration flickered, warming the spaces where fear and desire entwined. The orchestra's notes rose to cover murmurs, each measure echoing the tension between public decorum and private truth. He spoke of obligation once more, this time not as restraint, but as declaration. that any choice to remain with her would incur cost, that he was prepared to forfeit wealth, reputation, and inheritance if necessary. She absorbed the enormity of this, heart quickening with both apprehension and recognition. No act of courage had prepared her for this moment, the intertwining of admiration, attraction, and consequence so palpable that even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Their eyes met again, speaking a language beyond words, articulating the silent calculation of risk and reward. She realized the depth of his commitment, not to gratitude alone, but to the recognition of her selfhood and the unyielding assertion that choice could not be dictated by pedigree. He was prepared to dismantle his world to honor her existence. Her heart responded not with relief, but with a dawning awareness of what such a declaration demanded, not surrender but partnership, the shared navigation of consequence and desire, a courage equal to his own. The assembly, perceptive to unease though blind to truth, shifted in subtle alarm. Murmurs, once playful, acquired an edge. Eyes tracked them, some with envy, others with suspicion. Yet she moved with composure, each gesture deliberate, conveying confidence where custom demanded humility. His presence beside her did not shield. It announced, with measured certainty, that she was no longer incidental. The social order quivered at the assertion that choice and courage could outweigh lineage and expectation, and both felt the weight of its trembling. They paused near the gallery's edge, faces illuminated by candlelight, distance both preserving and exposing them. He spoke softly, the low cadence a balm and a challenge. "I cannot return to the world without you acknowledged. To pretend otherwise would dishonor us both." She regarded him steadily, heart caught between fear and exhilaration. Her lips parted to reply, yet the words faltered, for the truth they carried was immense. Love had become rebellion, and choice demanded consequence. Silence between them became charged with meaning, filled with the echo of society's scrutiny and the whisper of potential freedom. When at last she spoke, it was measured, resolute. "If we are to move forward, let it be together, not as a favor granted, but as two who have chosen each other, knowing the cost." Her declaration carried weight beyond the ballroom, beyond the night, beyond any precedent. He inclined his head, recognition of the enormity of her courage mirrored in his eyes. Around them, the room seemed to contract, the chandeliers glimmering like witnesses to a shift that would not be ignored. Their alignment was complete, yet the price was immediate and unavoidable. The first wave of consequence struck almost instantly. Courtiers whispered of impropriety, relatives exchanged glances heavy with warning, and the orchestra's final chord reverberated with the weight of unspoken accusation. He held her gaze, steady and unwavering, and she returned it, resolve firm despite apprehension. Together they had claimed a choice that threatened not only comfort, but expectation, inheritance, and reputation. The declaration had been made, the alignment chosen, and yet the world beyond the gilded walls would not suffer defiance silently. Outside the chandeliers, rumor awaited, patient and inexorable, ready to test the courage they had just committed to each other. The morning broke pale and trembling, a fragile light spilling over London rooftops, heralding a day that would not allow retreat. Outside, carriages rolled with purpose, horses stamping impatiently against slick cobbles. Inside the Duke's private chambers, he moved with deliberation, dressed with care yet untouched by ceremony, aware that no silk or cravat could armor him against what was to come. Letters lay upon his desk, some pleading, some threatening, all insisting upon obedience to expectation. He touched each with brief consideration before setting them aside. They mattered little now. The choice he had made, and the woman beside him, exceeded any summons from legacy or law. She entered quietly, the same measured composure that had first startled him now tempered by awareness of consequence. Her dress was modest, yet it carried an elegance beyond adornment, as though her dignity had been woven into every seam. She carried no fan, no letter, no shield beyond her own presence, yet it was enough. He studied her for a moment, noting the weight she bore in silence, the anticipatory knowledge of scrutiny, the burden of her own courage. She met his gaze evenly, unflinching, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed the cost of the nights spent weighing choice against consequence. He spoke first, voice low, steady, deliberate. "Today there will be demands," he said. "Council, family, society, they will not suffer our alignment silently." She inclined her head, acknowledging the reality she had known for weeks, the impending test that would press their courage against convention. He continued, tracing the curve of the desk absent-mindedly, as though seeking rhythm in the chaos. "I have chosen you openly. That choice will cost much. It may cost everything. But I cannot turn back. Each word carried both warning and reassurance, an assertion that courage now demanded action, not reflection. Their preparation for the day was silent, each movement purposeful. She fastened gloves with careful fingers, aware that their presence was more than decoration, it was armor. He adjusted his coat, the gold buttons glinting, a silent reminder of inheritance now imperiled. Outside, carriage wheels echoed against the wet streets, the city stirring, oblivious to the upheaval about to ripple through its structured calm. He extended his hand, not commanding, not requesting, but offering partnership in the purest sense, and she took it. In that clasp there was no need for words. Commitment, defiance, and shared resolve spoke more clearly than any proclamation could. Arriving at the assembly, a gathering of peers, family, and societal arbiters, the room immediately recognized the shift. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Eyes darted toward them, searching for fissures, scandal, hesitation. There were none. He offered her his arm with gentle formality, and she accepted, posture erect, expression composed. The subtle movement reverberated through the chamber. Proximity was declaration. No whispered explanation could counteract the quiet force of presence. To walk together, acknowledged, was to challenge the hierarchy and expectation that had sought to govern both of them for so long. Family approached first, faces carved with admonishment, eyes hard with indignation and disbelief. Their words were carefully measured. Alliances, inheritance, duty, propriety. Each phrase was a gauntlet, a test of adherence to law and lineage. He met every statement with calm refusal, acknowledging neither threat nor counsel as binding upon choice. She spoke only once, softly yet with clarity, "We do not seek to undo the world. We choose it differently." The simplicity of her words struck with precision, disarming argument without rancor, asserting a moral authority that came from lived courage rather than title. Those who heard it understood at once that resistance was no longer possible. Rumors rippled across the assembly, subtle at first, then gathering force. Whispers spread of scandal, audacity, impropriety. Gentlemen and ladies shifted uneasily, some attempting to recover control, others to anticipate the fallout. He remained calm, hand holding hers with deliberate firmness. Their silence, even as others spoke, projected unassailable alignment. Every gesture mattered. Each tilt of her head, each measured glance, each slow step across the polished floor declared that allegiance and love were not negotiable, that their choice was deliberate, final, and courageous. The crescendo came with a formal declaration, a bold, unprecedented move. In the main hall, before a crowd of peers, he spoke her name aloud, not as courtesy, not as acknowledgement, but as claim. "She has saved me once," he said, voice carrying to every corner, "and now she has chosen to remain with me by choice, not obligation. Let this be known, our alignment is complete and nothing beyond this room can diminish it." The chamber froze. Some faces paled, some hardened with indignation, but none moved to intervene. The weight of authority, when met with unwavering resolve, falters. She held his gaze, understanding the full magnitude of sacrifice implied. Reputation, wealth, influence, all subject to fracture by love alone. As they stood together, the tension and scrutiny coiled tightly around them. She realized that their survival would not be measured in safety but in integrity. She would not yield even as consequences threatened. He too felt the cost, the vast and immediate consequences of defying expectation, yet the burden seemed lighter in her presence. Together they had claimed agency where none had been permitted, reshaping the order of their world, moment by moment, step by step. In that room they were equal, unbowed, resolute, and infinitely more powerful than any title could confer. Outside, society murmured and churned. Letters would be written, alliances tested, judgments rendered. The path ahead was treacherous, and no shield would guard them from scrutiny. Yet within the chamber, where light caught crystal and dress alike, they found an unspoken sanctuary. Choice had become their fortress, courage their armor. Their alignment was absolute, and in that absoluteness lay both peril and profound triumph. Every heartbeat marked the rhythm of defiance, every breath a testament to endurance and desire intertwined. The climax arrived not with violence or spectacle, but with acknowledgement. Guests, uncertain whether to intervene or ignore, witnessed two people claim each other entirely with no apology, no compromise. Hands remained clasped, eyes met, hearts steady beneath the weight of history and expectation. It was a rebellion quiet yet irrevocable, demanding recognition. Those who sought to control, to discipline, to govern by propriety alone, found themselves powerless against the clarity of choice and the depth of courage displayed. Even as the assembly resumed the pretense of civility, a tremor persisted. No conversation, no maneuver, no whispered plotting could fully undo what had been witnessed. Two lives aligned by decision, by integrity, and by love that demanded consequence. Beyond the room, the world remained fraught, yet within it, a small truth endured. Courage, when exercised openly, reshapes not only those who dare but also those who observe. In this balance of peril and triumph, they had forged a bond untouchable by expectation. As they withdrew from the gathering, the sun lowered, gilding the streets with fleeting warmth, the city watching silently. She walked beside him, shoulders squared, gaze forward. He adjusted his pace to match hers, neither offering protection nor seeking reassurance, for neither was necessary. The day had tested them, and they had emerged not unscathed but undefeated. Outside, the rumble of carriages and voices carried the weight of the world, yet they moved through it with calm determination. Their defiance was both answer and question, unassailable and provocative, demanding that every eye acknowledge the alignment, the courage, the truth. A single candle burned in their chamber later that night, flames reflecting in crystal, gold, and polished wood. They sat together, hands still joined, contemplating a world that had demanded compliance and received refusal instead. Outside, society churned and judged, but here in quiet sanctuary, they measured victory not in survival, but in the preservation of choice, dignity, and devotion. Their gaze met, and in it, they recognized everything that had been risked and everything yet to be faced. Choice had brought consequence, consequence had brought clarity, and clarity had forged a bond immutable. The night deepened, shadows lengthening across walls, yet no fear lingered between them. Every challenge faced, every whisper endured, every expectation defied, culminated in this still, profound moment. Two souls aligned against a world built to separate them, their courage and devotion tested, affirmed, and eternal. And in the silence, unbroken by the chatter of society or the pull of tradition, they understood fully that love, when claimed without apology, demanded nothing less than the destruction of old worlds, and the creation of one of their own.